Hi everyone. So one of the requests that I got for real world problems was dealing with decimals and fractions in real world scenarios. Now, when you guys learned about decimals and fractions, you were very, very young, but this is something that a lot of adults have even forgotten over time because we have calculators. It's something that we just forget how to do by hand. So you'll notice on this worksheet, I wrote that it's strongly encouraged that you try to do this without a calculator. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to monitor that. But in order to get the most out of this assignment, trying it without a calculator is really going to help you. So I'm going to give you guys a few examples, and then you'll just do this one on your own piece of paper, like always, and submit it via Google Classroom. So I'm going to start off. The first problems that you're doing are converting decimals to fractions. And what I always try to point out to my students, and this is something I usually like to just spend, a half day on, just because it's so easy to forget since it's been many years since you've done it. But when you look at a decimal, so let me give you the first example. What's really helpful is that if you actually read it out loud. So what you want to remember is the tenths place and the hundredths. And the thing is, if you can read this out loud, then the answer is actually right in front of you. So what this says is, yeah, we read it as 4.22, but what this is technically saying is four whole parts, and because the final number is in the hundredth spot, we say 22 hundredths. Now you notice, when I read it that way, the answer is there for me, 22 hundredths. That's going to be the fraction. Now on the worksheet it says to reduce down all fractions, so we're just going to divide the top and the bottom by 2, and I get 11 over 50. So the way that we're going to write this is, remember, we have our 4 whole parts and 11 fiftieths. This is how you write 4.22 as a fraction. I want you guys to reduce it down all the way. So what you could do is you could write it like this, just to kind of see the whole process. So again, super easy process if you know how to read the decimal. So let's look at another one. Let me make sure you can see that. Okay. So now we've got, let's see, example 2, 7.7. Again, if you can read it, then it's actually very easy to write it out because this is in the tenths place. So this says 7 and 7 tenths. I guess I could have written that out as a word, but 7 and 7 tenths, so that just tells you 7 and 7 tenths, and that's it. You can't reduce it, nothing goes into 7 because it's prime, so that would be all you would have to do. So looking at a third example, we have 3.18. Again, if we just can read it, very easy to put it into a fraction. This is saying 3, and what space is that in? The final digit is in the hundredths. So we're going 3 and 18 hundredths. So that is written as 3/18 over 100. And then we can reduce that down. So we know both of those are divisible by 2. And we get 3 and 9 fiftieths. And that's it for converting decimals to fractions. Again, the really important part is you just have to know how to read it. If you know how to read it, then there really isn't any math involved unless you actually have to reduce a fraction. So that'll be the first 10 problems. That's why I gave you 10. I'm trying not to give you too much work during the online learning, but these go so fast that I figured 10 was appropriate. So let's go to the next one, which is converting fractions to decimals. And there's actually 2 approaches with this, and sometimes the way the fraction is written is actually just as easy as the process that we just did. So I want to show you that. My first example, I want to write it like that. So again, if you read it and it makes sense to change it into a decimal, you don't have to do any work. So when you read this, this says 4 and 2/10. So you think about where the 10th place is. That's the first digit. So this would literally just be 4.2. Now, not every mixed number is going to have base 10 or base 100. So what we're going to have to do is figure out a way to solve these when they don't have base 10 or base 100. So let me show you how to do it with this problem so you can look at it and know the answer, or you can use the process that I'm going to show you for every single problem that doesn't have a 10 or a 100 as its base. So what you would do is you would remind yourself you've got 4 whole parts. You don't have to do anything with the 4. So we're just going to look at the 2/10. So the 2/10, what that is saying is 2 divided by 10. So I would say 2 divided by 10. Now obviously we look at that and we know 10 doesn't go into 2. So you have to add a decimal and a 0, and you consider this a 20. Now that decimal goes back up. How many times does 10 go into 20? 2 times. Sorry, my email's going off. And 10 times 2 is 20, so there's no remainder. So there's where the 0.2 comes from. There's actually a third approach that I'll show you in the next example too. All right, so let's say you have something, again, that doesn't have base 10, so 1 and 5/6. I can't just look at that and know what the decimal is going to be. So I'll use the same approach that I just showed you guys, the second approach. I know I've got 1 whole part. I'm going to just drop that down. I don't need to worry about the 1. I need to worry about that second part, which is 5/6. Remember, a fraction just means the number on top divided by the number on bottom. So 5/6, 5 divided by 6. Obviously 6 doesn't go into 5. So I've got to do that same thing I did above, which is 0.0. Bring the decimal up. 6 goes into 50. Well, 6 times 8 is 48. I get 2 remaining. I'm going to add another 0, drop it down. 6 goes into 20 3 times. But we're actually going to stop here because the directions say round to the nearest hundredth. The reason I always stop at hundredth is mainly because that's where we stop in the real world. When we're dealing with money, we only have 2 digits. So for the problems that we're doing, I don't see any need for you to add a 3rd digit and go to the thousandth. So we've got our 0.83, so this would just be 1.83, and that's it. Now a second way to do this is to turn the mixed number into an improper fraction. This is really just personal preference. So if you like this method that I just showed you, do it that way. Again, I'm strongly encouraging you don't use a calculator. Obviously, you can easily put 5/6 into the calculator and get an answer. But the request that I received was extra practice on decimals and fractions. And if you do that with a calculator, you're not going to get that extra practice. And it's important to understand exactly what's happening, and to be able to do this mental math for any sort of placement exam, you'll have to take not just for your bachelor's, but all sorts of other programs, graduate programs, they require you to do some basic math. So it's always good to brush up on it. So the other way, so this is option 1. Option 2 is that you change that number into an improper fraction. If you forgot how to do that, you take the denominator, multiply it by the whole number. Oops, sorry, it's not a 2, 6 times 1. 6 times 1 is 6, and then you add the numerator. So this becomes 6 plus 5 on top, which is 11/6. So then your other option would be to divide 11 divided by 6. Now we know we can start here. We don't have to add a 0.0 yet. 6 goes into 11 one time. 11 minus 6 is 5, so now we've got to add that 0.0. All right, we're going to bring this down, and we are now kind of repeating what we just did. So 6 goes into 50. Notice we're seeing the same exact thing happening here. 6 goes into 58 times. You've got that 48. Your 2, again, I'm literally repeating the same exact process here. I add another 0. 6 goes into 20 3 times because 6 times 3 is 18. So you'll see that process works either way. You're going to get 1.83. So in this little tiny space on the bottom, let's just do one more. And let's see, 1 and 4/9. I personally prefer the option 1, so I'm going to do this one as option 1. But you notice with option 2, you end up pretty much doing the same thing. And just to kind of point out the difference between the two, with option 1, I just keep the whole number off to the side and I divide out the fraction to get the decimal. With option 2, I include the whole number and I turn it into an improper fraction. And so my final answer is the final answer. I don't have to piece two parts together. But like I said, I prefer option 1, so I'm going to stick with it. Okay, so I'm going to divide 4 divided by 9. Obviously 9 doesn't go into 4, so there's my decimal, add a 0. 9 goes into 40 4 times. 9 times 4 is 36. Drop a 4, add a 0. We're going to get a repeating number here. 9 goes into 40, once again, 4 times. I could keep going, but remember the directions do say to stop at the hundredths. So we're going to stop after 2 spaces. You notice every single time I'm going to get a 40. That's why that fraction is going to end up repeating. Oops, sorry about that. So I end up here with 1.44. All right, so like I said in the beginning, this is a fairly simple assignment. This is something, though, that when I got the request for more practice with decimals and fractions, I figured this would be a good time for you to just kind of try out some mental math, you know, practice that memory, remembering this stuff from when you were in elementary school, and, you know, just preparing you for any sort of placement tests or anything that you have to do in the future. And just as a reminder, this is the assignment, and you'll do everything on a separate piece of paper. You guys have been doing a really good job at that. Take a picture and send it to me via Google Classroom. As always, let me know if you have any questions.